Hi, I'm Jim Ward of the Middle Country Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode in our History Bite series. Today we will discuss Prohibition, which began in 1920 when the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of intoxicating liquors, went into effect with the passage of the Volstead Act. In the United States, an early wave of movements for state and local prohibition arose from the intensive religious revivalism of the 1820s and 30s, which stimulated movements towards perfectionism in human beings, including temperance and abolitionism. Although an abstinence pledge had been introduced by churches as early as 1800, the earliest temperance organizations seem to have been those founded at Saratoga, New York in 1808, and in Massachusetts in 1813. The movement spread rapidly under the influence of the churches. By 1833, there were 6,000 local societies in several U.S. states. The precedent for seeking temperance through law was set by a Massachusetts law passed in 1838 and repealed two years later, which prohibited sales of spirits in less than 15-gallon quantities. The first state prohibition law was passed in Maine in 1846 and ushered in a wave of such state legislation before the American Civil War. By the turn of the century, temperance societies, like the Women's Christian Temperance Union, were a common fixture in communities across the United States. Women played a strong role in the temperance movement, as alcohol was seen as a destructive force in families and marriages. In 1906, a new wave of attacks began on the sale of liquor, led by the Anti-Saloon League, established in 1893, and driven by a reaction to urban growth, as well as the rise of evangelical Protestantism and its view of saloon culture as corrupt and ungodly. In addition, many factory owners during the Industrial Revolution supported prohibition in their desire to prevent accidents and increase the efficiency of their workers in an era of increased industrial production and extended working hours. Conceived by Wayne Wheeler, the leader of the Anti-Saloon League, the 18th Amendment, which banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of intoxicating liquors, passed in both chambers of the U.S. Congress in December 1917 and was ratified by the requisite 3/4 of the states in January 1919. Its language called for Congress to pass enforcement legislation, and that was championed by Andrew Volstead, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, who engineered passage of the National Prohibition Act, better known as the Volstead Act, over the veto of President Woodrow Wilson. The 18th Amendment went into effect 1 year later, by which time no fewer than 33 states had already enacted their own prohibition legislation. Neither the Volstead Act nor the 18th Amendment was enforced with great success. Indeed, entire illegal economies, including bootlegging, speakeasies, and distilling operations, flourished. The earliest bootleggers began smuggling foreign-made commercial liquor into the United States from across the Canadian and Mexican borders and along the seacoast from ships under foreign registry. Their favorite sources of supply were the Bahamas, Cuba, and the French islands of Saint Pierre and Miquelon off the southern coast of Newfoundland. A favorite rendezvous of the rum-running ships was a point opposite Atlantic City, New Jersey, just outside the 3-mile limit beyond which the U.S. government lacked jurisdiction. The bootleggers anchored in that area and discharged their loads in high-powered craft that were built to outrace U.S. Coast Guard cutters. In addition, the Prohibition era encouraged the rise of criminal activity associated with bootlegging. The most notorious example was the Chicago gangster Al Capone, who earned a staggering $60 million annually from bootleg operations and speakeasies. Such illegal operations fueled a corresponding rise in gang violence, including the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in Chicago in 1929, in which several men, dressed as policemen and believed to be associated with Capone, shot and killed a group of men in an enemy gang. There were also many unintended consequences of Prohibition. Some cash-strapped restaurants shuttered their doors since they could no longer make a profit from liquor sales. Thousands of people died each year from drinking cheap moonshine tainted with toxins, and revenues shrank for many states that had previously relied on liquor taxes to fund roads, schools, and other public benefits. With the country mired in the Great Depression by 1932, creating jobs and revenue by legalizing the liquor industry had an undeniable appeal. Democrat Franklin D. Roosevelt ran for president that year on a platform calling for Prohibition's repeal and easily won victory over the incumbent, President Herbert Hoover. As the Great Depression continued to grind on, however, and it became increasingly clear that the Volstead Act was unenforceable, Prohibition faded as a political issue. In March 1933, shortly after taking office, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the Cullen-Harrison Act, which amended the Volstead Act and permitted the manufacturing and sale of low-alcohol beer and wines up to 3.2% alcohol by volume. 9 months later, on December 5, 1933, Prohibition was repealed at the federal level with the ratification of the 21st Amendment, which allowed Prohibition to be maintained at the state and local levels, however. Though a few states continued to prohibit alcohol after Prohibition's end, all had abandoned the ban by 1966. Thank you for joining us for today's episode. If you enjoyed it, click like, and if you watched on YouTube, hit subscribe. Thanks so much, and we'll see you all next time.